of Dr. Kesh's students. And so I study the reconceptualization of word order in L2 or second language Chinese. So basically I study native English speakers that are learning Chinese as a second language, or foreign language in this case, because they're studying outside of China. So use Han's finger. Great, this is working. So my objective of the study is to investigate how native English speaking learners acquire word order in Chinese as a foreign language. As I said, the major issues with this are, right now the word order studies in this field are quite sparse, and there's a controversy over what the basic word order is. So is it subject verb object? Is it subject object verb? Is it object subject verb? Basically there was a study that came out in the 70s that said, well, the order has been shifting from SVO to SOV. And after that, many studies came out that were either for or against this. And since then, there really hasn't been much consensus on the topic. And the reason why that's relevant is because Chinese word order poses problems not only to the linguists, but to the learners as well. Because of course, if we don't have a basic word order structure, what are we teaching? So, a little background on word order though. Well, I'll use this fancy thing. So on my theoretical continuum of configurational to non-configurational languages, we'll start with English, because I think everyone here is familiar with English. So we would put English more towards the configurational end, because we would say our basic word order is subject verb object for English, right? I like ice cream, or he goes to the park, right? So Russian, on the other hand, for example, and I believe we do have some people who are native Russian speakers here, so maybe we can verify this. The word order is a little bit more flexible, and this is directly due to the morphological inflection. So if we look at Russian, high level of morphological inflection, word order is more flexible. Now there might be more preferred ways of saying things, but really that might be more pragmatically constrained rather than grammatically constrained. English, you're going to see it's more grammatically constrained. Chinese actually has less morphological inflection than English does, but it does this crazy thing where they put the object before the subject and the verb. But this is one of the things that's kind of causing controversy. And that's why there's not really a basic word order in Chinese. And of course, this presents difficulty to learners. So that's one of the things that I'm investigating in my topic. So I just want to bring you guys up to speed a little bit on what the big controversy is here in Chinese. So this study investigates word order acquisition in CFL learners, as I've said. And basically, I'm trying to figure out which word order features are more difficult to acquire than others, because previous to this study, there's only been a few studies that have tried to figure out some kind of word order error taxonomy. There's Ko and Jiang and Jin who have done studies, and I did a preliminary study last year. So that's kind of really it in the field. So the theoretical frameworks that I'm using are the cognitive functionalist approach as used by Jiang, but I don't completely agree with everything that she came out with and the way she analyzed everything, but I like the framework that she used. So I'm using that as well. So for cognitive linguistics, that maintains that language use must be explained in relation to underlying processes. And of course, functionalist school of language argues that language has rules and it's systematically structured, and the structures are placeholders for communicative functions. Also using markedness theory, Jin used this to basically do a similar study to what I'm doing. In 2008, where he picked some word order features as well, and he was building on Ekman. And with this, we can predict the difficulty of acquisition that the learners are going to have. And so, for an example, we would say that SVO is typologically unmarked, so we would predict that this is going to be easier to acquire. And I did find that in my preliminary study with elementary level students of Chinese as a foreign language. Okay, so my research questions are, how do native English-speaking students learning Chinese as a foreign language, begin to reconceptualize specific word order phenomena in Chinese? And how does the shift from English word order to Chinese word order take place in L2 development? So basically, I want to figure out at what stages they're going to acquire which word order features. And these are the word order features that I looked at in my study. I'm going to explain them. And I have color-coded everything because I don't know if anyone else here speaks Chinese. So we're going to start over here with the principle of temporal sequence, and in this case, I'm looking specifically into locative inversion. Principle of temporal sequence is a big player in word order. Basically, it follows under the cognitive functionalist approach iconicity, which says that word order follows world order. So it's a reflection of the real world states. And in this case, it's a reflection of, with locative inversion, where things are. So in English, you could say something like, I do homework in a cafe. You could also say, in a cafe, I do homework, right? That's the locative is flexible. But in Chinese, you'll notice that the purple part here, which says in a cafe, has to go before the verb. We can't put it anywhere else in the sentence. For Chinese people, that's where it goes. You have to just put the locative at the beginning of the sentence, because to them, the importance of it is basically precedes and is predominant to the verb, because you have to know where you are before you know what you're doing, I guess. This is Chinese, the Chinese way. And then, in my preliminary study and in Zhang's study though, we used translation tasks, and this was actually quite difficult for the students to acquire. And I'll go over the results in a minute, but I did have different results in my study because I did it not as a translation task. So that was interesting. For question word inversion, you can see here, this is totally flipped, and I wanted to show you guys that it's possible to basically flip the entire word order, but it's still easy to acquire, and according to markedness theory, in Jin, both of these were actually predicted to be easy to acquire, and according to my study, I found this one was easy to acquire. Zhang did not do question word inversion in her study. Now, according to cognitive functionalist approach, I'm arguing that this is a prototype, and basically prototypes are specific sets of categories of maybe nouns or verbs. I haven't found anybody that's done question words as a prototype yet, so this is just my proposal. But basically, they just have to be categories that all kind of meet the same description, and the more prototypical something is, the more flexible it is. And question words in Chinese can be used in two different ways to be more or less flexible. So they can be presented like this, where this would be a case where the speaker is not present. And then you could say it the same way as English, so this would be basically this would be saying she is who. And you could say who is she, but that would be like if we were all in a room together like this and I was asking someone about somebody in the room. So again, it's pragmatically constrained, the word over here. So for the harder to acquire ones, topicalization, now this is a marked feature, so of course we're going to predict that it's difficult to acquire. And as you can see, it's completely flipped again, and the object precedes the subject and the verb here. Now, Zhang did not find many word order errors in her study with this, but she said that it was probably because she was using Australian learners of English, of Chinese rather, and she also said that because it was all translation tasks, they probably preferred to use subject, verb, object, which is similar to my study, but I had some different findings. Oh, geez, I'm sorry, guys. So I have different findings, and I also had Australian and American learners, so we'll get to that in a minute. But I also think that this follows iconicity-like principle of temporal sequence, where word order reflects world order. In this case, the topic takes prominence in the conversation because it's most relevant to the speakers. So you would put the topic first and then make comments, and unlike English, where you basically have one clause following the main, like a one subordinate clause following the main clause, typically, this one you can have many comments following one topic. And then finally, the whole before part versus part before whole. As you can see in English, we would write something like an address starting with the number and then moving to the country. So this is basically smaller before larger scope. But in Chinese, they would start with the country and finish with a number. And like I said, I had Australian and American participants in my study, and since I was using dates and addresses, Australians and Americans write dates differently, and I wanted to see how that would play out, so that's another interesting thing I wanted to look for. Okay, so like I said, I had Australian and Americans in my study, and I had intermediate groups in both, and I only had advanced students in the American group, and they were all undergraduate students in either public universities in Australia or in the US, and they were all native English speakers who used English at least 80% of the day. Some of them spoke other languages, like mostly Romance languages. So basically I wanted to control for anyone who had any background with Chinese or any other Asian language. And all the classes met for at least 3 hours a week, and all of the instructors were either native Chinese teachers or the American grew up in Taiwan, so he was effectively a native Chinese English bilingual, and they all have been living outside of China for more than 5 years. So pretty homogenous as far as the background goes. I used pen and paper tasks in a classroom setting. I did a background questionnaire and then a discourse completion task. And so they were presented with scenarios in English, and they had to translate and then either respond with a translation, or I asked a question and then I had to respond in Chinese, or they had multiple choice. I had a couple filler items, and all the scenarios were trying to elicit these word order structures that I just talked about. So, onto the data analysis. I used chi-square test of independence to see if anything had to do with the nationality or the level, because I basically want to look further later on into whether there's a difference between Australian learners of English or US learners of English, because those are two of the hot spots for Chinese as a foreign language right now, and also if there's any difference between the levels, between intermediate and advanced. So I'm going to show you guys these different questions that I just pulled from my data, which I think kind of highlight some of the results. So for the PTS unlocative inversion, this is the in a cafe versus at the end of the sentence versus at the beginning of the sentence. So they had a choice between two options. So if you see here, this part says in America, and this is at the end. So in Chinese, this was the correct choice because we can't put the in America at the end of the sentence in Chinese. So you can see here that most of the students got this correct, and it was independent of level and nationality. So it didn't matter if they were Australian or American, didn't matter if they were intermediate or advanced. And while this follows what I thought as far as this particular study, it doesn't agree with John or my preliminary study. And like I said, this is because, I think, because in this situation I gave them a choice so they can recognize it if they're given a choice between the right and wrong answer, but when they have to produce a translation on their own, it was a lot of mixed up answers, mostly not Chinese or English, but somewhere in between for both me and John. For the question word inversion, this was a scenario where I basically wrote something up like, you are gossiping with your friend and you want to ask her who her new boyfriend is. He's not there. So in this situation, who would you ask who her boyfriend is? And this would result in a flip translation of asking the opposite grammatical construction than English. So I wanted to see if they would produce the flip translation, and they did. 20 out of 22 students responded with the correct Chinese word order, again, independent of level and nationality. Doesn't matter if they're Australian or American, doesn't matter if they're intermediate or advanced. Again, follows what I predicted here. So I want to test in the future for the opposite one as well. Now to the topicalization, because this is where it kind of gets more interesting. So they were all translation tasks. So here's the scenario that again, it was like, you're in the library and you're looking at books with a friend. And they had basically I was looking to see if they would choose to use topic comment structure, so that's the object subject verb, or SVO structure. It was independent of level, so both intermediate and advanced students used topic comment structure, but it was not independent of nationality. Significantly more Americans chose topic comment. Actually, no Australians used topic comment at all. So that means that only the intermediate and advanced students in the American group used it. So I think that this, and based on later things, I think that basically this shows that students, since it's more appropriate to use subject, verb, object in this situation and not topic comment, they're not using topic comment in pragmatically appropriate ways. The American group isn't so far. So onto the next situation, this was where topic comment and subject, verb, object were equally appropriate, so it was user choice, user preference. It was not independent of level. Both, more of the intermediate students chose subject, verb, object, and the advanced group was split 50-50. Again, it could indicate pragmatic incompetence, like maybe they weren't sure if they could use it or not, or maybe it was just user preference. It's difficult to tell without a qualitative part. It was not independent of nationality. Only topic comment in the intermediate groups was the Australian group, though. So that's why I'm not certain if in the American intermediate group they didn't know if they could use it or not, or if it was really just user preference of SVO. Maybe like John says, because English prefers SVO. Finally, in the cabbage scenario, these are just titles I gave to the questions. This is where topic comment structure is very appropriate. So this is about ordering cabbage in a restaurant. And you could, again, use topic comment or SVO. This was independent of both level and nationality. Not a single student used topic comment structure. So this really shows me that students, even at the advanced level, in both American and Australian groups might lack the pragmatic competence necessary to use topic comment structure when it is appropriate. So finally, the whole before part versus part before whole. So this is the address scenario. So I just said, oh, you work at a doctor's office and you have to text somebody. So I had both a date, because I wanted to see dates, because Australians and Americans do that differently. And I wanted to see the address as well. And there was no significant relationship here. So actually students, I thought, are not able to reconceptualize at the discourse level based on this and the topic comment structure, the cabbage scenario. And effectively, based on the cognitive functional approach, placeholders can't be rearranged yet at this level. So some conclusions that I have are the findings of this study demonstrate that Chinese word order is coded grammatically at the sentence level for CFL learners, but not pragmatically at the discourse level. And so subject verb object plus actual situational context equals optional topic comment structure. So for this scenario, for example, here the cabbage is the most prominent thing that reflects the real world, right? So using the iconicity, for example, from the cognitive functionalist approach, you would think that it would prompt the use of topic comment structure using cabbage as the topic and then the comment of do you have it. So it would be cabbage, do you have it, bai cai you ma, something like that. But none of them actually use that structure at all. So that shows me that they are not prepared to have pragmatically appropriate conversations, even at the advanced level. So basically that's what I just said. Topicalization, the whole before part structures did present the biggest challenges, as I predicted. Principle of temporal sequence and question word inversion were acquired by most students regardless of level or nationality. And again, this was different from what I predicted based on Zhang in my previous study. And I did predict these though through what I used in my frameworks that I used. And effectively, word order at the sentence level is not an issue. Although I do want to look into this more with the principle of temporal sequence. But at the discourse level, speech and pragmatic competence do require further investigation. And getting into education, there's a gap in the classroom where students are not gaining the pragmatic competence necessary to use their newly reconceptualized structures in pragmatic and competent ways. So we know that they can form object, subject, verb sentences, but they can't use them appropriately. That's basically what I'm getting at. And even in my preliminary study with the elementary level students, they could also form object, subject, verb sentences, but they can't seem to use them appropriately. So this could be due to the fact that it is difficult to teach pragmatic skills in a classroom, right? Because we don't have real, actual situational context, right? We can kind of create that, but it's not always easy. There's also the issue of native teacher blindness. Sometimes it's difficult to teach pragmatic skills when you're a native speaker and you kind of take those skills for granted. But I did have an American instructor, although it's arguable that he is effectively a native speaker because he grew up in Taiwan. So he might fall into this category as well. So again, some of that needs to be looked into a little bit more. So that's my presentation. Thank you very much.